If you had told me 5 years ago that Atlus was going to release a Persona game with real-life calendar elements, daily gameplay incentives, constant updates, and that I could play it on mobile as well, I'd have been all over it. In fact, it was around that time that I got a new phone and installed SMTDX2, which despite having a ton of issues, was very clearly just designed for mobile devices, and I had a reasonable amount of fun with it before quitting. My phone's home screen has a custom metanav icon right in the middle of the screen, and for many years, I was waiting to link it to a Persona game. Well, now we have Persona 5 The Phantom X. P5X advertises itself as a free-to-play entry in the Persona series, featuring the signature style of the original games, with social life simulation, dungeon crawling, persona building, and the stylish combat the series is known for, with powerful moves that can wipe out enemies in one hit. In reality, P5X is a gacha game built on top of Persona's modern formula. Its combat is a much simpler version of what is available in the original games, and is entirely balanced around characters that you randomly acquire through a banner system, which may or may not give you what you want. The game's been out in China, Taiwan, and Korea for quite some time now, but it's only just recently that it's released globally in English and Japanese, including on Steam. The global version is set to a much older version of the game, with less content to experience. But regardless, this is the version of the game the majority of the world has access to, so it's the one being reviewed today. My thoughts on this game can be summarized this way. It has some redeeming qualities, but even as a hardcore Persona fan, if you're not already preconditioned to tolerating gacha games and all the baggage that comes with the genre, you'll have to force yourself to ignore every issue that plagues the game just so you're able to enjoy it. The gacha elements are by no means optional, as you will eventually hit a stone wall that requires either grinding materials or trying your luck with character drops. And admittedly, while in the main story this wall will come later rather than sooner, fans expecting a standard Persona game experience should be warned that your mileage will vary, depending entirely on how lucky or willing to gamble you are. Do I recommend it? Honestly, no. P5X is entirely based upon an existing property, and unless you're willing to put up with the average gacha game design, or are just really obsessed with Persona, there's really no reason for you to ever play this over any other Atlus game out there. Especially if you're willing to spend money to get into the series. Persona 3 Reload, Persona 5 Royal, and Persona 4 Golden, or Revival if you're watching this in the future, often go on sale on all platforms, are much better experiences, and will even cost you less than some of the bundles available in P5X. With that said, it's a free game, and with that price tag, there's a lot of things that can be excused. But there's a lack of polish and quality control in this game, especially in the PC version, that's honestly a little embarrassing for a series such as Persona. Atlus has an incredible track record with most of its releases, with even some of its lesser well-received games still having an acceptable degree of polish. The development of this game was outsourced to Black Wings, which is a subsidiary of Perfect World in China. Atlus was mostly hands-off with development until recently, where they had to step in for things such as story writing, which was heavily criticized worldwide. As of this day, I've played P5X for about 80 hours, which is the average playtime of a full Atlus RPG. I've cleared all the content available on the first patch of the game, which is 2 palaces, not counting the second boss, which is not on the release version, 2 blocks of the Memento side dungeon, a handful of side stories in the city life portion of the game, and challenge battles similar to the ones in Persona 5 Royal. I wanted to play as much of it as possible before judging the game, because Persona, and Atlus games in general, are some of my favorite games of all time. Atlus has become famous for its stylish, polished, and easy-to-use UI. Persona 5 is the biggest example. Reload and Metaphor are recent ones, but even before that, on the PlayStation 1 with Revelations, Atlus would always put some special flair into their designs, and even when the design is simpler, it's still clean and easy to use. There's some small issues here and there, such as unclear effect descriptions on equipment or bad sorting, but it's never outright bad. I can only describe P5X UI as unfinished. The art itself looks good, but for the most part, it's copied straight from the original game. Even then, it has this weird constant off-brand feel to it, with basic errors such as misaligned text, punctuation errors, typos, and different font sizes which make the game feel inauthentic compared to its source material. I'm pretty convinced that Sega is rushing the localization team because in other games, these errors just don't happen. It's designed with mobile devices in mind, and the PC version feels like a bit of an afterthought, with controller support being even worse. Menus break and lock up all the time, with me having to close and open them again to be able to navigate properly, particularly the menus for leveling up equipment. I constantly have to refresh the page because the controller locks up and keeps trying to select random items to use as materials, despite me not even pressing any buttons. Touchscreen buttons are on screen at all times, including ones from menus that you can access through the pause screen, and also through a command wheel, which other gacha games also do. The screen is constantly polluted with notifications and duplicate UI elements, and because of it, people playing on controller have to do weird button combos like D-pad plus triangle, R1 plus square, etc. to access certain menus because there's so many pointless shortcuts that they ran out of buttons to use. They couldn't even be bothered to detect which platform you're playing on because tap the screen to continue shows up all the time, and if you're on a controller, they just slap another button prompt on top of the button that was already there. A common rebuttal for this is that P5X was designed for mobile and PC, but Persona is primarily a series designed for consoles. Mainline Persona games often have the opposite problem where keyboard controls are awful, so really controller support should be expected for a Persona game. I'm not sure what exactly happened here, but while most character portraits look fine, others are absolutely compressed to bits, especially Motaha and Merope. They're crunched like crazy while most others look perfectly fine. Small polish problems like this could easily be fixed, but it just gives off the impression that they don't care enough to fix it. Something that sets Persona 5 apart from other Atlus games is how shops have really expressive UI and animations, combining 2D and 3D elements together. P5 had Untouchable and Takemi's Clinic, and Strikers had Sophia's shop, all of which look amazing. But in P5X, there's just something janky and low quality about its versions of these shops, like the size of things and animations are just wrong. It feels close enough, but you can see small polishing errors such as EY moving with an extremely low frame rate, or Takemi not having a fade-in effect so the transition between 2D and 3D isn't as jarring. But curiously, Martham's shop, the game's real money shop, is perfectly polished, animated, and has a ton of character flair in it. It's obviously a bit of a reach to say that it's on purpose, but it did immediately stand out to me when playing the game. Menus themselves feel deliberately overcrowded and confusing. Characters only have 3 skills, but they don't level up the traditional way. Instead, they need XP materials, XP level cap unlock perfumes, a weapon, which also needs to be leveled up with XP materials specifically for weapons, weapon level cap unlock crystals, duplicate copies of weapons to increase their ability by small amounts, incense materials to level up the little skills they have, duplicates of the character itself to increase its awareness level, requiring you to pull them on the gacha 7 times, and a set of matching revelation cards, of which you need 4 of one type, and a major one of a different matching type to get a set bonus. On top of that, these revelation cards can also be leveled up with its own XP material, have level caps based on their rarity, and on top of that, increase up to 4 other stats of the character equipping them at random, so you need to manage potential hundreds or more cards and filter through them before even deciding which one to burn materials on. These are acquired in a specific farming mode which consumes a stamina resource, which regenerates over real-life time, and in the case of some of these, you'll have to wait entire weeks because the resource drops are also limited. On top of that, every upgrade action costs a small amount of Kompaku gems, which in my opinion shouldn't even exist, because you have them awarded to you in the hundreds of thousands just for breathing. Until you memorize where everything is and its purpose, and what kinds of things not to farm, you could potentially be missing out on several rewards that you're entitled to for having done certain tasks without knowing, or even be doing irreversible damage to your account, spending things such as stamina recovery items or metagems, the premium currency, which are very limited items that should not be used lightly. This adds an unnecessary level of pressure and stress to a series that's otherwise extremely casual friendly, and it all just feels like financial pitfalls for the sake of getting you to waste time and money. When it comes to Persona and the social link system, I have the view that the game is best played blind and with dialogue options chosen honest, because the cutscenes you sometimes get when spending time to catch up with characters who aren't quite ready to rank up are some of the cooler dialogue in the game. And New Game Plus feels all the more fresh if you've missed a bunch of stuff your first time around. When I first played Persona 4 Golden, I hadn't even started a significant amount of the available social links, and I didn't care at all about maxing all Arcana. Missing content in these games is fine by me, because there's always next time, the next playthrough, it'll be fresh, and the game isn't going anywhere. P5X kind of spits on that, because not only can you not repeat any scene you've seen before, there's an actual financial punishment for not choosing the right dialogue and the right activities, as you'll waste time and stamina catching up and making up for your bad dialogue choices. On top of that, while a lot of characters can be romanced in this game, because of its always online nature, this choice is permanent, and reverting it costs premium currency. This means that if you do not want to miss out on certain scenes, you're forced to get into a romance with every character in the game. And if you don't want to miss anything at all, you're going to have to pay up anyway, because there are friendship and romance exclusive profile cosmetics to be acquired as well. Every confidant or synergy has 20 ranks. While this might give off the impression of the social links having twice the content of the original games, which would make sense in a live service gacha, you quickly realize at least half of every character's ranks are filler. The way it works is that every odd rank is real, and every even rank is filler. For filler ranks, you need to take the confidant to a location on the map, of which there are a handful, with pretty neat interactions, but once you exhaust all of them, it will always play the same dialogue. Every time you hang out with them, the meter will fill up, and if it's full, they will rank up, and the next real rank will become available. Eventually, ranking up confidants will slow down to a crawl, requiring you to do several filler hangouts or spend huge amounts of yen or gift items, which give way more points than any regular old dialogue. This is the biggest money burner in the game, and the reason part-time jobs are so important in P5X. Confidants will also need social stats for almost every real rank, which also rank at a snail's pace after a while, but that's not a problem for me. What I don't like is how most conventionally agreed upon good confidants are basically all based on kindness, with the guts requiring one coming in future patches. It really narrows down the kinds of activities one does if trying to stay optimal, which again, isn't really the point of a Persona game, but when you add real-world time and money pressure into it, the push to do things right is felt much stronger. The game's graphics are honestly a mixed bag. For the most part, it's actually kind of grown on me over time. I really like how the second palace looks. I like the expanded maps of Shibuya and Shinjuku, the school areas look really cool, and the game looks great in clear sunny weather, especially in the soccer minigame. Some things feel made of plastic, at fault of the game's reflections and ambient occlusion effects, which are not as pronounced in other Persona games. Rainy days look cool in some areas, and I really like the detail of raindrops on windows and umbrellas. But it feels like they've just slapped crystal clear reflections on every material when it's raining, making everything feel like a bit of a mirror. Even Shinjuku at night looks kind of weird, and it doesn't help that the reflections are screen space, so they'll constantly disappear from view too. The game for the most part feels wrong to play. By that, I mean that a lot of polish present in other games and even Persona 5 is really just not present. Character movement is very stiff. The protagonist is really slow in the metaverse. The sprinting animation and effect from the original is practically non-existent, and it's faster to tap in and out of sprint mode, which is just as clunky and annoying to deal with. The animation for using the grappling hook is lackluster and stiff. Third Eye darkens the screen to an unnecessary degree, and if it worked like the original, it would have been okay, but in P5X it works on a toggle plus cooldown system, so when you use it, you'll have your screen darkened for several seconds unless you turn it off, which then makes you unable to use it for a handful of seconds more. Sprinting is inexplicably removed from City Life, which I can only assume is due to a lack of available buttons, as R2 opens the city map, something I've accidentally done over and over again due to muscle memory from P5R and P3R. Stealth is practically useless in this game. In the original, sneaking from cover to cover to ambush enemy shadows was the way to play. And while P5X does have this mechanic, not only is cover extremely clunky to navigate, there's no point in doing so, as enemies take so long to notice you that you can run several laps around them and even hit them in the face afterwards, and you'll still get player advantage regardless. The only time where the mechanic was of any use to me was in Crossfates, as they reused Kamoshida's castle, and as such, it was designed with cover stealth mechanics in mind. Due to the game's online nature, the transitions between dungeon exploration and battle are also very slow and stuttery, sometimes freezing for several seconds before changing screens. On the mobile version of the game, and specifically on the global server, there can be entire 10+ second gaps between you choosing a skill and it actually happening in-game, making battles an absolute chore to get through, even on 3x real-time speed and auto mode. The game also tells me that the recommended graphics settings for me are high, but even when I set the graphics to the lowest possible, it performs terribly. I'm not sure if there's an optimization issue or something server-side, but the mobile version is very unplayable for me, and I've had to do most content on the PC version, which does run relatively well. The game's combat isn't just watered down Persona. I feel like it completely misses the mark and boils it down to the absolute basics in order to keep the gameplay loop as narrow as possible, so the meta is always at the mercy of the gacha system. Similar to Persona, the game works with a party of 4 plus a navigator, with the protagonist having access to multiple personas and thus multiple builds. The difference is that every persona and party member is limited to the same 3 skills with no change or progression. These skills have extremely long descriptions with many numbers and effects listed, which might feel overwhelming at first, but quickly you realize that none of these actually impact gameplay, and the core gameplay loop is using 1 skill for setup, 1 skill for sweeping, potentially knocking everyone down, and then doing the all-out attack, which is massively buffed in this game, and winning, with the 3rd skill or other deviations being extremely situational and generally not needed unless you're doing content designed for units better and stronger than the ones you have, or you're simply under-leveled. Take for example Joker. His first skill is Curse AoE damage, which grants 1 stack of Will of Rebellion. His second skill is a single target, but it grants more Will of Rebellion if there's only 1 enemy in the field. And his third skill is also AoE damage, which deals more damage if you're on Extra Turn. Extra Turn happens if you have a certain number of Will of Rebellion stacks at the end of your turn. Basically, Joker's entire skill rotation is skill 1 or 2, getting Extra Turn, skill 3, and then repeating over and over again with 0 variation. Upgrading characters changes absolutely nothing about how you play them, and especially skill upgrades feel extremely dull, as they just raise numbers by single-digit percentages, a number that couldn't really be any higher because in future patches, late-game scaling is so brutal, with enemies having millions of HP, that a 1% damage increase is game-changing. Persona building, which is a core aspect of Megaton games, is not only generally pointless, several guides tell you to actively avoid it until the endgame, as it's a resource pitfall, and only a handful of pre-made personas are actually useful for beating the game's content. More than that, the game itself will give you several pre-made personas as progress rewards, so there's very little reason to ever even bother fusing anything. And because the highest damage potential comes from highly invested, ultra-rare gacha characters, the game naturally railroads you into seeking out personas and builds for the protagonist that are based around support, healing, and defense, so you can sustain attacks while your allies sweep everything. The One More system is heavily nerfed in a pretty blatant attempt to curb game-breaking strategies. Instead of getting a second turn, you're forced to pass the baton to one of your allies, which then results in a pre-made Thief Tactics ability, which is a generic attack based off of the main element of the character. Simply getting a second turn at all is the passive ability of Joker, who's a 5-star gacha character with the drop rate of 0.4, despite being the protagonist of the game the entire gacha is based upon. Pulling Joker requires platinum tickets, or metagems, a limited resource, and while you are guaranteed a 5-star character after 80 failures, there's a 50% chance that it will not be Joker at all, and you'll have to do it all over again. On top of that, getting any other 5-star before the 80 failure pity resets the counter, so you'd also have to start all over again there. To fully max out the character, you'll also have to pull them 7 times for their awareness level, and then you'll also have to pull their 5-star weapon on a separate gacha system several times to max out its forge level. On top of that, Joker is a limited character, so if you miss out on him, you are never getting the chance to get him again unless his banner gets a rerun. Maxing out characters in the gacha isn't necessary for main story content, which I assume is what the majority of players are interested in. However, because the game does have a competitive scoreboard, where the higher you are, the more rewards you get at the end of the season, there is an incentive to highly invest into characters designed for those challenges, which does bring a little bit of a pay-to-win element to the game. You're not necessarily losing at the game, but unless you invest countless amounts of money into the game, you are never going to have a chance at being at the top, especially since some of these modes are guild-based, and of course, the top guilds have join requirements that only allow other whales into them, because no one wants a guildmate that's dragging everyone down. All-out attack is extremely powerful bonus damage, and there is no reason to ever not go for it. Abstaining from the all-out attack or baton passes during your one more is a very common strategy in mainline Persona games, but in P5X, while you do have the option, all it does is skip your turn with zero compensation, so doing this is a useless action in 99.9% of cases. The only time this was ever useful was in a very specific side boss that would change its affinities to null after being hit by that element, so you'd want to use the best possible skills and not the one from one more. But even then, this is definitely not intended, as I was using suboptimal party members and I could have steamrolled it with a perfect party and level. Persona is way more than just hitting weaknesses and all-out attacking. Even with way simpler skills and way less effects, the core gameplay loop of mainline Persona games ends up being way more involved and in-depth than what P5X offers. Here, while skills do have a lot to offer in terms of numbers and sub-effects, they offer nothing in terms of substance, as the gameplay loop does really just boil down to using the same skill rotation over and over, brute forcing battles with raw stat increase. The best way to describe P5X's gameplay is that it features a lot of illusion of depth. One of the biggest complaints from more advanced Persona players when it comes to the game's balance is that Atlus loves skewing the games in favor of the protagonist, other male party members like Junpei, Kanji, and Ryuji, and making physical skills disproportionately overpowered. It's kind of funny how the one time the exact opposite is true is when the game is coincidentally a gacha game and there's an actual financial incentive to curtail these gameplay styles. The few good and challenging battles this game offers are almost always the result of you getting into something without the meta character designed to steamroll it, or a party pumped full of upgrades which requires whole days on the grinding treadmill due to the real-time stamina system. While this game's side bosses have extremely overcomplicated mechanics, requiring you to read entire tutorial pages to understand how they work, if your party consists of overleveled 5-star gacha characters, you can completely ignore the mechanic and fly past the challenge even if the enemy resists your elemental affinities purely because of the stat gap. While this is kind of expected in an RPG game, where you can grind to increase your level and have an easier time with battles, P5X is an online game with content scattered everywhere, and you can't go back or repeat anything. That means that if you focus too much on one thing and overlevel, all of the other side content that you should have been doing alongside your main activities is no longer going to be enjoyable to you because you're going to steamroll it whether you like it or not. This is particularly problematic in palaces and mementos, as they are huge labyrinths filled with chests and enemies which are basically just padding to force you to take longer to reach the end of the content. If every remotely engaging fight there is suddenly too easy for you, the entire experience feels like a chore to go through. Palace navigation feels extremely boring at times. What sets palaces apart is the several puzzles that serve as pace breakers between battles. I personally never loved these, but I can respect people who can prefer these over pure combat-only dungeon crawling. P5X, however, misses the point entirely, because the solutions to these puzzles are always highlighted with a waypoint on screen. There is no way to disable this help, so it's by no means optional. The puzzles are just a formality because the solution is always shoved in your face. So the one thing that makes palaces special is suddenly invalidated, and now it's back to being a hallway simulator. If your intentions with this game are to play the main story and then dip out, you might not be so lucky. While the first palace is relatively easy, the game will force you to engage with side activities to level the protagonist before being able to progress, which is a form of gameplay padding. In the second palace, you will eventually get gapped in terms of stats, and you'll be forced to engage with either the revelation card system, which is possibly one of the worst mechanics I've ever seen in a game, or take extremely broken gacha characters with you. For example, you'll face off against a pair of Suiki near the end of the second palace. These shadows use wind skills, which Lufel is weak against. Even if he wasn't, without serious grinding, they are just going to one-shot anyone in your party. Lufel is not only weak to wind, he's your only 4-star healer in this patch, and he's really bad at it to boot. It's true that competitive tier lists rank Lufel at the top in a lot of situations, primarily because of his attack buffs. However, this doesn't take into account that in a competitive setting, you are expected to have Lufel at Awakening level 6, Compared to base Morgana, who resists wind, heals way more, and even has a random chance to critically heal everyone outside his turn, the fight is way easier if you just pull Morgana rather than invest a whole bunch of time and money into Lufel. The gacha system doesn't really need any introduction. I'm not a fan in general of this kind of system, and I also find the practice of creating accounts over and over until you get a good start to be really obnoxious. I got terrible luck on my first 50 pulls, but I decided to keep the account so I could have an honest outlook on what the experience is like when you're not very lucky. I wish I could say that lasted the whole way through, but when I pulled for Joker, I got him relatively early. So I've experienced both sides of being very lucky and also very unlucky in the gacha system. There's some rumors and auditing going around about global rates being worse and the removal of soft pity, but there's no evidence for that, so I'm not even going to talk about it here. I don't want to say too much about the story. The internet is practically flooded with Subway Slammer memes, and there's nothing of substance to add. The second palace is much better, and the promise is that from the third palace onwards, the plot will only get better. I can't speak on it, but I'm highly anticipating it. There are some good things in P5X, and I do want to give them credit. I'm quite fond of magic and healing having the ability to crit. It's a bit conflicting at first because they can't knock down while fizz crits can, which is good, but they should probably be named something else. The idea of unique skills on every persona having their own mini buffs is good, and it does go a step above the unique traits of games like Persona 5 Royal and even SMT5 Vengeance, but they're not significant enough in P5X to make any real impact in gameplay beyond mindless numbers going up. The shields that prevent enemies from being knocked down until you hit their weakness several times could be good, but much like physical critting in current Persona games, if enemies are all weak to the same element with different amounts of shield, that could potentially be several turns a character can get by spamming AoE because there's always someone getting knocked down on every attack. I'm a big fan of Highlight, and I think the way it works is slightly better than 3G in Persona 3 Reload. The meter being shared amongst all party members, the support highlights, the cooldowns, and no affinity piercing makes the choice of which one to use a lot more impactful. However, there's very little reason not to use one immediately off cooldown, because that's turns wasted where you could be charging the next one. Navigator changes are good, and I'm a fan of how they have a selection of skills to pick from. In a traditional Persona game, this might be a bit tricky to balance because the party has a more active role in support, but giving the Navigator an active role in combat similar to Fuka in Reload was a nice step in that direction. I really like some of the side stories in this game. Anderson's and Minami's are really good, the rhythm and soccer minigames are really fun, the crossfade stories have been interesting so far, chats with the original Phantom Thieves and LeBlanc are really short, but some of my favorite moments in the game. Character customization is really cool, and although there's obviously a copious amount of premium cosmetics, there's also plenty of freedom of expression for free-to-play players. Because of the game's mobile-first design, a cool side effect is that it's the first and only Atlus game with native ultra-wide support, which I was very happy to see. The graphics options are also more extensive than any other Atlus game on PC, and that should be praised even if it's kind of the bare minimum for a PC port. The soundtrack is full of bangers, but this is a Persona game, it shouldn't even be a question. The game is, for all intents and purposes, still very cozy feeling, especially in rainy days, social activities, and in the player's home. In that sense, they did nail some of the feeling of the original games, and every now and then I do get a glimpse of the games I've grown to be such a massive fan of. It's just a shame that this fun is constantly stripped away from you when you're reminded what kind of game you're dealing with. I know it sounds weird, but I wouldn't even mind if they had a $70 game that worked on a real-time calendar but had no gacha system. It's unorthodox, but I think it could be fun. Phantom Idols could be awarded to you after clearing their storyline rather than being pulled from a random banner. I get that there would be less incentive to keep updating the game with content and collaborations, but these operate on FOMO to begin with, and I don't know if I really want to support that. In the time between release and me writing this review, version 1.1 released, with new content, some changes, and also the first few examples of terrible mismanagement of the global version of the game, resulting in the game's review score shifting from an already concerning 70% to now less than 50%, becoming Atlus's worst rated game of all time on Steam. Here's a quick overview of every reward and mechanic change between the original version of P5X and the global version. For the beginner thief support rewards, all levels had the metagem rewards replaced with platinum millicoins. The character pull is generally 150 metagems, and a weapon pull is generally 100. The gem rewards were 200, 300, 400, and 600 respectively, and on global, you are given 2, 2, 2, and 3 millicoins instead, resulting not only in a net loss of 600 joules, but also having the value locked into weapon pools only as you're given millicoins. Marion was added in version 1.1 rather than 1.2. Marion is one of the units that are extremely sought after for her healing capabilities, which are always relevant to the meta. On version 1.3, Marion's limited banner run ended, but she was added to the standard Kydal draft. Knowing this, guides advised players not to pull her limited banner and save gold tickets, as she'd be on the standard draft in Global 1.3. To combat this foresight, Sega moved her release version and confirmed she is not being added to standard yet. What yet means could be anything and is likely a strategy to induce FOMO in players. The social media account event has one less golden ticket on Global, or more correctly, Korea has one extra, as China also only had 3. All LeBlanc event rewards had their metagem rewards cut by 40%, as well as their Rebel Coin rewards. While the gem reward is a clear nerf, the exchange shop can still be swept, so that nerf in particular is null. The beginner pack in the premium shop gives a different outfit, but the original can be bought with daily login reward coins. Luffel's Hooden Loot is global only, and a source of gold tickets, platinum tickets, and millicoins. Spending coins on cosmetics here is generally considered wasteful. Surprisingly, global players get more materials in the Battle Pass. The male gifts for celebrating a character's birthday were nerfed, losing some pretty expensive synergy gift items. Palace and Mementos exploration rewards are slightly buffed, but also backloaded. This means that you get 100 more gems for fully clearing a palace or a Mementos area, but the rewards are further shoved to the back rather than being even. This incentivizes spending in the early game, or rushing content more stressfully. Gem rewards for confidants were shuffled around, and there is no net loss, but again, a lot of backloading. Global has pay-to-win pack ads shoved on screen at critical moments, such as pulling a character for the first time, or even after stealing a treasure in the main story. Marion's Cognitite and weapon are allegedly removed from Luffel's business plan, making her early limited banner induce even more FOMO. Permanent standard banner characters have their 5-star weapon added to Untouchable Salamander coin exchange in all servers, except Global and Japan. Compensation rewards after maintenance on all patches has been reduced from 300 joules to 100. On top of that, China also gets an additional 300 gems through codes, which Global does not receive, resulting in a 500 gem nerf. Velvet Trial rewards are strongly backloaded, with the first half having half the rewards, and the later half having 50% more rewards. This pushes rewards heavily into later stages of progression, creating FOMO for banners such as Joker and Marion, or whatever is active when a new player creates an account. On top of that, all enemies have their level increased by 5 and 1 elemental weakness removed, making the mode even more of a chore and a grind to clear. Bowie and Panther are buffed in Global, using the values from China's latest patches. All characters have their second and third awakening effects swapped around, while this is only in effect for newer characters in China. In terms of fixes, almost nothing got fixed. Out of the several localization errors, I was only able to find one punctuation fix, some skill description changes, and nothing else. Some of the more egregious examples are still present in game. Removing auto at the start of battle will still have the first turn be automatically selected now, which wasn't the case in 1.0. Controller support is now even worse. The brand new mode, Metro of Desire, is literally inaccessible on controller unless you use cursor mode and manually drag a virtual mouse around to click the button. The one big addition is, of course, Metro of Desire. This is a roguelite mode which can be played with no restrictions, featuring a set of rotating bosses and a Slay the Spire-esque relic system which grants you buffs, sometimes with drawbacks. There's also a charm system which acts like relics, but all effects are positive, and getting 2 or 4 of the same type activates a set bonus. I really like this mechanic. Some relics, or lost items, are pretty cool too, but there's a lack of risk and reward with the vast majority of them. Some synergies are also blatantly better than others, and due to the lack of variety, it's very easy to stumble onto them every run and not only have an absurd amount of defense, but also turn your healing into damage, which is so strong that you don't even need to use attack skills. I would have been more of a fan of this mode if it did not use your existing gacha characters and loadouts, because there's very little reason to play higher difficulties, and 90% of the mode is invalidated by using Luffel Instakill, basically turning into a perk draft with the occasional boss. Because you can also choose the final boss and know its affinities ahead of time, you can basically always take the same team, play on the lowest difficulty, sweep every boss on auto mode, and get every weekly reward without even engaging with the combat system. In that regard, I've heard the Tartarus mode in future versions of the game will be much more to my liking. P5X is a weird game. I'm still playing it in hopes it gets better. I want it to get better. I'm looking forward to some of the modes that haven't released globally yet. I'm sticking around because I really like the Persona games, but in its current state, I can only recommend this game to equally die-hard fans. And I don't see myself ever recommending spending any money on it. If you're curious about the Persona series, I urge you to play the other games. They'll be a much better experience. And if you're a casual Persona fan looking to get into other Atlus games, you're better off trying Metaphori Fantasio, Soul Hackers 2, Raido, Shin Megami Tensei 5, or maybe even some games that are console only, like Digital Devil Saga, Strange Journey, or the older Persona games. Basically, anything that isn't P5X, because while there is fun to be had here, you can do so much better.